Gimel. The Rebbe is going to be machadish now, a gewaltige chiddush, that there is actually a חיוב of Bikkurim immediately, miyad, and yet it doesn't conflict because with the statement of the Yerishta v'yeshavta bo, which would mean the communal, but there is a חיוב for an individual immediately, as the Rebbe will explain it. Gimel. We can say the explanation. So that that the obligation for Bikkurim does not apply only after they settle, they inherit and settle kibush and chalukah yesh lefarish b'shnei efanim. We can say it on two interpretations. Does it mean all Yidden, or does it mean the individual Yidden? Aleph, la'acharei yirushosam v'yeshivosam shall call Yisrael, that what it means is after all Yidden, which is 14 years, when all Yidden inherit and settle, v'chein mefurish b'pirush Rashi b'shas, and also Rashi, like as such, is clearly in Rashi in the Gemara. The la'achar Yerusha v'yeshiva. What does it mean after Yerusha yeshiva? It's not talking about individual. It's talking about Hainu acharei Yudalet Shono the kibush v'chiluk. We're talking about after the 14 years of conquering and distribution. Okay, Pirush Rashi Latera Khan, and also as Rashi explains here, Lenischayiv Bikkurim Achakovshu Es Ha'orez V'chilkuah. Until they conquered the whole land. He's not talking about this individual, what he did. It is the whole land for all Yidden. That is what it means. La'acharei Achar Yerusha V'yeshiva. However, we can also tie each base Kol Yochid V'yochid, talking about each individual. Yad kishakovash, as soon as he conquered his part, kones chelkai. So then he conquered as chelkai, and he acquired it because he conquered it. Nischai b'mitzvah, then he was obligated in this mitzvah. That means after he conquers and settles a yeshiva for him. So in Yerushalmi mefurish, in Yerushalmi it is very clear. The loy nischayvu b'mitzvahs hatluyas ba'aretz, that they will not obligated in all the mitzvahs that are on the land, like Bikkurim, all mitzvahs, it would seem. Elo la'achar arba esri shono sheva shekavshu v'sheva shechilku. Says clearly that the mitzvahs hatluyas ba'aretz were only obligated after 14 years. The 7 years that it takes to conquer, 7 years to distribute, all Yid. Ad sho shekonu kula, until the time, says the Yerushalmi, konu kula, the whole words kind. We don't say the first one, he acquired and becomes mechayiv. No, you have to wait till everybody is going to get their part, and that's when the חיוב is going to start. And also in Yerushalmi, it's brought down the Braisa of Rabbi Shmuel. Kol biyis shenemar b'Torah, nemar b'Torah la'achrei elbe esrei shana. All the time when the Torah says you're coming, that you came in, kisove, kiyove, it's all after 14 years nemru. Sheva shekivshu v'sheva shechilku. Ka'ofen ha'alaf. Now this goes according to the first way, that we have to have kibush and chiluk from the whole land for all of you. So, since that's the everybody's the opinion of the Yerushalmi, the Rashi, the Gemara, but we can say that the Sifri learns differently. He doesn't need V'yirashta v'yeshavta ba, meaning all Yidden. It means this individual. Based on this, we can explain the view and the intent of the Sifri here. The Ein v'hoya el miyad. When he says v'hoya means miyad, the shita sifri, that according to the view of the Sifri, mechadish hakosuf, the Torah Taki comes up with a new chiddush, a novelty, the shani mitzvahs bikurim. That mitzvahs bikurim is different. Mekama v'kama mitzvahs hatluyis ba'aretz, than many mitzvahs that are hinged in the land, which we always have to wait for 40 years. But no, this is different. She'ein chiyuv maschil. But the Bikkurim, the obligation does not start with Siyuma Shel Yudalit Shono Shel Kibush V'Chiluk to Kol Yisrael, that the obligation of Bikkurim does not start when the 14 years ends, so that all Yidden will conquer and distribute. Elokol Yochid V'Yochid Nischayim V'Bikkurim, but rather every individual is obligated in the Bikkurim Miyad La'achari Shekovash Eskalko, immediately after he conquered his part. Yerusha v'yeshiva shaloi. V'yerashta v'yeshavta means your own personal. And the Sifri disagrees, and he holds that that's what the pasuk is coming to say. Disagrees with the other quotes that we quoted earlier. That's the learning, the way the Sifri says that V'hoya is coming to tell you miyad. And the Rebbe says learning in this way also becomes sweeten the language of the Tanit Vei Rabbi Shmuel. That will sweeten the language of the Tanit Vei Rabbi Shmuel. What does he say? He says, Hoyil v'nemru biyas b'Torah stam. Since in the Torah it says, when you come, it doesn't say, what? Stop. And the Torah details by one of them. After you inherit and you settle it, so we know by one that means coming into the land. Dahainu. Where does it say? Kabi Melech. With regards to Ksing, the Ksiv, it says when you come to the land, and you inherit it and you settle it. And you say, I'll place a king. So by the king, when is that? That's Lachar Irisha Yeshiva. So says the Tanit Vei Rabbi Shmuel. So every time when the Torah says Ki Savo, it means after Yerusha Yeshiva. So Kavaldik Akashi here. So why does the Tanit Vei Rabbi Shmuel just quote the pasuk of Ki Savo El Ha'oretz when it's talking about the Simalai Melech, in which it's after Shiba Shekov's Chok, and that teaches us for every time when it says Ki Savo you, why doesn't he bring down the pasuk of Bikkurim? It also says Pirishtu v'yashavta bo. Over here too, the Torah is Achar Yerusha Yeshiva. Good Yisa b'Gemara, and the Gemara Taka says the L'chat man da Omar. In one man da Omar, Havi Melech u'Bikkurim shnei ksum b'im kechot. That the Melech that it says after Shekovshu v'Cholku, and by Bikkurim, which is after Shekovshu v'Cholku, are two psukim that come together, tell us the same thing, and they can't teach therefore, and we can't learn from it. That all bias are achre Shekovshu v'Cholku. So the Gemara specifically brings down also Bikkurim. Why does the Tanit Vei Rabbi Shmuel just quote the Melech and not the Bikkurim? Aha. But this is Gavaldik according to the Rebbe's interpretation. That Take by Bikkurim, it's not Achre Shekovshu. They're talking about the Sifri holds that it's talking about the individual. So what's the meaning of the Tanit Vei Rabbi Shmuel? Porat locha kosuf be'echad mehem. The Torah detailed by one, which is Melech. Why one? Why not Bikkurim? Also it says. Like in the Gemara. The Gemara says that it's two psukim according to one man Omer, but why are we saying only Melech? Why is Tanit Vei Rabbi Shmuel say Melech? But based on the above that we explained the Sifri, Yesh Leimar, we can say Shatona Devei Rabbi Shmuel Drosha HaSifri Olim B'Kon Echad. We can say that the Tona Devei Rabbi Shmuel and the Drosha of the Sifri go up in one direction, go up in one line, in one corner, in one pipe. They go together. Why? Because mitzvahs shani, mitzvahs bikurim, mishar mitzvahs atluyas ba'aretz. There's like a difference. The mitzvah bikurim is different than all the mitzvahs which are hinged on the land. We can't bring a raya from there because it's like a different. All the other mitzvahs only after the 14 years of conquering and distributing. Shatoida hitila as חיוב, but over here, when it comes to Bikkurim, the Torah places the חיוב al kol yachad v'yachad miyad on every individual immediately. Soon as he can recognize, he knows his portion, then it's virashna v'shavtava. Then he has to bring Bikkurim. So b'chidush the parat lecha hakosu rak be'echad mehem. So what is the Torah said by one of them that it's what the shear of Kisavoyu? It's only by one, the Rak Be'echad man, which is by the Melech, because by the Melech is 14 years. Kabe Melech, Lachi Yerusha v'Yeshiva, Kibush v'Chiluk Chulu. There, I'm talking about after it was settled, not individually, but for everybody. So therefore, the Torah is only one place. It's by Melech, because by Bikkurim, it's not after, it's by the individual. So this also explains that. The Rebbe suggests that the חיוב of Bikkurim is not dependent on Klal Yisrael, Kovish, Kibush, and Chiluk, but it depends on the individual. And that's why the Tana Devei Rabbi Shmuel can only say, in one place we can learn that's Achrei Kibush v'Chiluk, and that's from Melech, because Bikkurim would not be a good example, because Bikkurim is and not after Kibush v'Chiluk. So that seems to explain why the Sifri, what it means miyad. But still, it doesn't fit, the Rebbe says, with the language of miyad. If at least you had to wait for that individual for him to get his person when his kibush chiluk, is still not fitting to say v'hoyo miyad. And the Rebbe is going to mechadish even further. It could be take miyad mamish. If a person got a portion from before, as the Bnei Yisrael, as we'll see. Dalet. This explanation is not sufficient to really explain the language of this Sifri. Because the simple language when it says that the Sifri says means immediately mashma shemiyad bevoim la'aretz is chai b'Bikkurim. That as soon as they came to the land of the chai b'Bikkurim, immediately they were chai b'Bikkurim. But if, according to the above explanation, that the חיוב becomes once the person can recognize what his portion is, okay. You don't have to wait for everybody, but that also takes you need first this 7 years of conquering before anybody got any portion, and then you need the years of distribution. So in the beginning, in the first of the second 7 years when they started to distribute, you can say the individual is mechuyev. But in the Sifri it says miyad, it's not miyad they came there. Then he can recognize his portion and he'll be mechuyev. But in the first 7 years they were conquering, we didn't know yet who gets what. We couldn't tell who gets what. So the Rebbe said, Yeshleimar Bazem, can say, because we're saying it's a din on the individual, it's really possible to have the חיוב Bikkurim immediately. So the Rebbe said like this: this that we explained earlier in the view of the Sifri. Shatnai di Yerusha v'Yeshiva b'Bikkurim. Hudin Benegea Kol Yochid Yochid, that the condition that it needs to be settled and conquered and settled by Bikkurim is something which applies to each individual. That the Tekev Kshemakir is Chelkem is Chai Bikkurim. That as soon as he can tell what his portion is, he would be obligated Bikkurim. The Loik Yishar mitzvahs Hatluis Ba'oretz, unlike other mitzvahs, Shlon is Chai B'hem Ad Sho Shekonu Kula. Over there, they were not obligated only until the time that it was all acquired to all Yidden. So the intent is not there. Shachilu Kurak ben din choybas yochid bedin atolu b'tzibur. It's not just to say that there's a difference. So there's an obligation with the community and there's an obligation with the individual. More than that. It makes a difference how we define this condition, Yerusha v'Yeshiva. When we define Yerusha v'Yeshiva by an individual, it's defined differently than Yerusha v'Yeshiva as a whole. And that's why we don't even need Yerusha v'Yeshiva in certain cases. Beroiv, kemat kol ha-mitzvahs ha-tluis b'oretz. The majority, almost all mitzvahs tluis b'oretz. Chaloi sachiyu tluya b'kibush oretz v'chalukosa. The obligation can only rest. The resting of the obligation hinges on conquering the land and distributing it. Shekibush v'chiluk ha'oretz, because when you conquer, you distribute the land. Heim ha'goyrmim sheyischayvu mitzvahs elu atluis b'oretz. That is what causes that you should be chayiv in the mitzvahs that hinge on the land. It was the conquering and the distribution. What makes up these mitzvahs is because you conquered the land and you distribute it. Why? What does it have to do? Either because until that time that everybody has their part, they're still lacking in the completeness of the sanctity of the land. That sanctity is what impacts, that brings about the obligation of this mitzvahs Luis Ba'aretz. And until you have that, you don't have yet the that impact. Or the obligation to do the mitzvahs that hinge on the land, you have to acquire the whole land. You can't, it doesn't happen without acquiring the whole land. So therefore, we don't have an obligation before it's fully captured, either because the Kedusha comes then, or because only when there's a kinyan, that when we can have a חיוב of Bikkurim. However, Bikkurim, as opposed to Bikkurim, over there, the obligation is just by coming to the land. The Torah says, V'yarashta v'yashavta but the V'yarashta v'yashavta, I mean, that doesn't cause the resting of the obligation, not because you inherited and you rested his obligation. Still not all that it's all. That's not why we could Bikkurim. Elurak hasoras arivida ravi. That's only removing, as known the Gemara, a lion that rests over it, which means if you haven't captured and split the land, you don't have a land yet. So what are we going to say? I'm going to say you're going to come to Eretz Yisrael, bring Bikkurim right away. But there's no Bikkurim, there's no field, there's no planting, there's no first seed. So the reason that Torah is saying Yirashta v'Shavta is basically to remove that obstacle that we can't bring Bikkurim because we don't have any Bikkurim. It's called the Arida Reviele. So, but it's not that you need to inherit it in order to be B'chayiv with Bikkurim. You need to inherit it and split it. Yirashta v'Shavta is to have Bikkurim what to bring. Because the observance of this mitzvah in actuality, it's only when the field is his and it is in his domain. like you say, he's saying in his confession when he brings the Bikkurim, that's after he inherited and he settled there, when he already has a clear portion of the land. He says, I brought the fruit that you've given me. So that's not making up the chiyuv. It's just that's when he has it. He doesn't have it otherwise. And this is the kavanah of the sifri. This boy means immediately. Since the boy Bikkurim is chal, the obligation with chal miyad the boy loris as soon as they come to the land. Just like challah, they're mechuyev as soon as they come to the land. You're mechuyev challah. But by challah, it's easy because you make a dough. You're mechuyev in which you separate from the dough. You can actually fulfill it as soon as you come to the land. Mamash. Here, the חיוב starts when you come to the land, but you don't have yet fruit to bring. That's by challah. Mashenki Bikkurim shetzorich liyis bereishis priya domo asher nasatu li Hashem, from the fruit that Hashem has given you. Yavshel lekaima b'poil. You cannot actually practically fulfill it ad lachri v'yirashta v'yishavta that you conquer and you settle it. When the owner of the field can recognize that this is a field, his portion of the land, that's what you're mechuyev. Other than that, it's not nosatali. There's nothing to make Bikkurim of, and there's nothing to give Bikkurim of. So therefore, the chiyuv is immediately. V'yirishta v'yishavta is not a condition to make the chiyuv. That's a practical application. So when could you have Reish Adoma is when v'yirishta v'yishavta. And then the Rebbe is going to say even more than that. The Rebbe is going to say that even there's a case that you're going to be mechuyev immediately as soon as you get into Eretz Yisrael. It's not even going to be Yirishta v'Shavta bo, because Yirishta v'Shavta bo is not a condition, doesn't make up. It's only the practical. Sometimes it can be an obligation, as the Rebbe will bring down in Oisei. Oisei. We can say even more than this. So the Shita says Sifri, that in the view of the Sifri, Hoysef Shari is Lekayim Bepoyel, Mitzvahs Bikkurim. You could actually, opportunity, there was a possibility to fulfill the Mitzvah Bikkurim immediately. Bevoim La'aretz, when you come to the land. Mamish, actually, B'tchilas HaKibush. Not even after 7 years, right away. We find in the Sifri, the Pasuk says that Moshe said to Yisrael, Moshe says to Yisrael, if you go with us, etc. Moshe Rabbeinu is saying to Yisrael, so he says, and we'll do good for you. He promises him to do good. What is this good that he was going to do for him? That to his children, they're going to give the fat of Yericho. Until the Beis HaMikdash will be built, they will be able to have the fat, the good part of Yericho, for that extended period of time. So V'hoyu b'nei Yisrael says the Sifri. So the b'nei Yisrael were eating Oisa Arba Meir Shona V'Arboim Shona. Those 440 years from the time they entered Eretz Yisrael until the Beis HaMikdash was built. Mispar Hashonim Ereshus Knesses Yisrael La'aretz Ad Binyan Beis HaMechira. Those are the number of years from the time they entered Eretz Yisrael until they built the chosen house, the Beis HaMikdash. So it turns out so it turns out that this fat of Yericho that was promised to the Yidden, Behem Heitivuli Yisrael, and they did good to Yisrael. It was the Yidden gave it to Yisrael. They actually gave it to Yisrael. As soon as they conquered Israel, when they conquered Yericho, they didn't have to wait. They got that place right away. Is the promise that it was given to them. The Yeshlachker says we can really question and investigate. What is the halacha of Doshna Shel Yericho Shalohosav Mitzvahs Chiluk? It wasn't part of the distribution. The Hainu HaGodel, it wasn't part of the lottery. They gave it to them. They gave it to them all without the Godel. That in the beginning, as soon as they entered, it was a clear part that belongs to the Yisrael. The Bnei Yisrael. Moshem is Chai Bikkurim. So when were they obligated Bikkurim? So the Shita Sashas Chulu Dein Chiyachem Bikkurim Rak Lachar Yudal Shonod the Kibush Chiluk, according to the view of the Gemara. Now there's no obligation to Bikkurim only after 14 years of conquering and distribution. It needs to be, you have to wait till you acquire the whole Eretz Yisrael. We don't say that everybody, as you're getting, you acquire it and you're mechuyev. Same thing would be true with the Doshna Shel Yericho, that the Bnei Yisrael got, even though it wasn't included in the dividing of the land after the 7 years that they conquered, because it was already given away. But still, there's no חיוב before everybody is divided. The whole land is divided. But based on what we explained before in the view of the Sifri, the chalois חיוב Bikkurim tluya b'biyasaretz, that the resting of the obligation of Bikkurim comes as soon it hinges on coming to the land. It's not the Rashta V'Shavta. But neither the Yerusha Yeshiva, this that the Pasuk says, according to the Sifri, that Yerusha Yeshiva, the Bikkurim, Einay Elo Kadesh HaBikkurim, you Mereishis Pri Adom Hashem Nasata Liyasha. That's to have the Bikkurim from the first fruit that you, Hashem, gave me. So therefore the Rebbe says it's logical to say, Shebenidin Zeh, in a case like Doshna Shel Yericho, the valley of the Yericho, Shahoya Chelkom Shebnei Yisrael, which was the portion of Bnei Yisrael, Umevurer Kvar, and it was already sorted out. So therefore, immediately, when they conquered and they settled there, they have become obligated in Bikkurim. So the Rebbe wants to say that according to the Sifri, the way the Rebbe learns the Sifri, they were mechoyev already. The Bnei Yisrael mechoyev. This way it's kipshuta mamash. That there was an obligation Bikkurim. The Bnei Yisrael were mechoyev right away. The beginning was kibush Yericho, was conquering Yericho. V'nitan doishna, and that the doishna was given miyad lebnei Yisrael, immediately to Bnei Yisrael. V'nischayim miyad Bikkurim, and immediately they were chayim Bikkurim. So that's Gavaldik. The Rebbe explains that even in practical ways there was a חיוב. First, it was theoretical. It was Ariyah Dereviyah that they couldn't get it until they had their own trees. And Nosatali took at least 7 years. But it's still the chalois is miyad, that's the Rebbe. But now the Rebbe says miyad, and in practical terms, just like by challah, that is right away, you make an isa, you mechayev. Over here, as soon as they conquered it, the doshna was given to them, so they're immediately mechayev bikurim. And the Rebbe says now, the hero from these two opinions, even though there is only one halacha after 7 years or after 1 year, but there's in the spiritual and the message we have for both. And the Rebbe is going to talk two levels of Bikkurim. thanking Hashem after Kibbush V'chiluk, or thanking Hashem immediately, saying Meida'ani, or later on. Let's look inside. Well, Klal Amru Chazal, sages give a rule, but again, the Pluktus Shebetoyra, about arguments in the Torah. She'elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim, both opinions are words of the living God. And many times the intention was explained over here. It's not only that all opinions are part of our Torah that we study because it's part of Torah. But more than that, that each opinion, there is room in the person's conduct in actuality. The fact that we know the halacha is like one opinion is benegea and hoge b'maisa kipshuta is literally what to do. You can't do like two opinions. You do like one. That's the halacha. But when we do this, the mitzvahs that take the place, tefillas come in the place of korbanos. Which means the spiritual level of the mitzvahs. While we don't have the mitzvah of poil over there, there is room for both, for all opinions. The same thing is in our case. There's room for that you do Bikkurim after 7 years, and you do Bikkurim immediately when you enter Eretz Yisrael. These two opinions in the mitzvah Bikkurim, whether the obligation only started after 14 years that they conquered and distributed, or so it took place as soon as they came into the land. There's a idea and there's a lesson here. A lesson in the conduct of a person and his actions. And similar to this, in our case, these two have been mitzvahs chala kipshute mamish. The mitzvahs chala, which is literally starts as soon as they came in, the vayachem. Shehireshis arishasechem k'mei bikurim. That's also the first of like bikurim. So by chala, there's no disagreement. So over there, it's the beginning. It's like bikurim. So, Babir was up. And the Rebbe is going to explain now how, on the spiritual level, there's the two levels here. What is the idea of the mitzvah Bikkurim? That's a praise and a thank you of the one who brings the Bikkurim. He's blessing, thanking Hashem for the goodness, the favors that He did with him. Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim. He brought us to this place. He gave us this land. And I brought Hashem. Thanking Hashem. Thank you for giving me this land. I'm bringing it. I'm showing my appreciation. Thank you for giving it. And this obligates not only, but to read, to say thank you. Maybe v'koida, it's not just bring, but v'koida, hu chelik ha-mitzvah min ha-Torah. Part of the Torah mitzvah is to actually read and say the thank you. That's the Pirush Rashi, shetzorich hodum laharis she'ene kofir tova. As Rashi explains, in Rashi's commentary, a person has to show that he does not deny the goodness. So based on this, we can say this is the contents of Bikkurim, saying thank you. So these two opinions on when is the time of חיוב Bikkurim, they are similar to the two types of thank yous that Hashem has to say to the Eibishter every day. Aleph, number one, you have the thank you that's in the beginning of the day. As soon as he wakes up, the Mishnah says when a person wakes up from his sleep, before you wash your hands, Moide, I thank you. I thank you before you. You return my soul. That's number one. Number two, you have the thank you that you give and the recognition, the praise, and thank you during davening. Starting from the thank you, the Haidah, thankfully acknowledging in the beginning of the davening, so we're saying Hoidu, and then many times during the davening, you say Hoidu, and also in the standing in the Amidah, we thank you, Ad L'Sima Tfilah, till the end, Ad L'Sima Mamish, also Mamish at the end. B'minig sheniskabel u'mekuyim ato al Kol Yisrael, in a minig which is been accepted, and now it's being observed by all Yidden. Amidas Apostle, Ach Tzadikim, Yoidu, the Haidah, L'Shmech of Hashem's name. There are two ways in the idea of saying thank you. The first thank you that the person fulfills, he says, as soon as he gets up from his sleep. That didn't come through reflection or maskana and a conclusion. Sickly is a logical conclusion. The great and powerful goodness that was done to him by returning his soul. Because just now he didn't have time even to reflect and contemplate on it. Miyad kiloshin hasefer b'Bikkurim, that you do that as soon. He says, so this is a miyad, like the Bikkurim said by the Sifri. He didn't even wash his hand. Especially to begin with. So he just woke up from his sleep. He didn't even wash his hands. Especially to in the beginning, a person should not be thinking divrei Torah by the mushkav al mishkal mitose came to Zidayim chulu while he's still laying on his bed before until Zidayim chulu. So can't really turn, can't really reflect. He's still not applying any logical reflection and meditation. That's not what's happening at this point when he gets up in the morning. This admission, this thank you, is mainly as a result from this simple belief which is planted in the heart of every Jew. In his pure belief, he recognizes the fact that he gets up from his sleep on every day. That is because Hashem by himself is the one that gives him back his soul. And therefore, halacha bepashtus, the halacha in the simple, b'shoh sheyikatz b'soif shnosei, that when you wake up at the end of your sleep, mevorech, v'hual mitosei, you bless, you're still in your bed, kach, as follows, quoting, Elikai nishama shenasata bi moida ani lefanecha chulu. So you already make that prayer, kind nishama, and you say moida lefanecha chulu, moida b'dibur mamish, in your word you actually are Meidah, you're thanking and thankfully admitting in speech for the goodness that was done with you by returning your soul. As opposed to the thank you, the acknowledgement during the time of davening, that comes through a logical reflection, like all other matters of arousal that take place during the time of davening. They come through reflection, as the ruling of the Mishnah Shulchan Aruch. Now, before the davening, a person has to reflect. That's even before you start davening. Should think about the exaltment of Hashem blessed and the low status of the human being. Then you have, this is before davening, then you have the reflection during the davening. As a result, he thanks Hashem. This is the difference between the two above opinions in the obligation of Bikkurim Naterim. According to the Sifri Boy, it means immediately the Bikkurim he al derech the Meidani. That thank you Bikkurim, that's similar to the thank you of Meidani. You do that immediately when you wake up Mishnasi. So likewise, when we're thanking, acknowledging, and thankfully acknowledging Hashem about the Bikkurim, it needs to be as soon as you land to the land of Eretz Yisrael. As opposed to the opinion of the Gemara, that they were not obligated in Bikkurim until after 14 years of conquering and distribution. That thank you and that acknowledgement of Bikkurim is similar to the thank you that is a continuation at the end of davening. It's the end. After all of the matters of reflection during the davening and before the davening. Then the thank you, acknowledgement to Hashem comes from a deep recognition in the kindness of blessed Hashem, and then it's a most complete thank you. It's a most complete acknowledgement. And same Bikkurim, that only after, specifically after we conclude all the conquering and the distribution of the land, then you thank Hashem for giving the land. He repaid us. You give the fruit which is the total best, praiseworthy fruit. Matzah the tachlis hashlemus, condition of tachlis hashlemus. So the Rebbe says the two opinions are the two thank yous. But the question is, what's the first thank you is a natural neshama thank you, just for bringing back your soul without meditation, without reflection. The second one is the end of is like you bring the actual Zion, Parshas Tov, and the Parshas Tov includes, in many years we read it, Kushana Zu, in that year, Tofshin Mem Zion, which was the publishing of the sicha. So evidently, when the Rebbe said the sicha in Tofshin Mem Gimel, Tofshin Dalet, it wasn't that way. So that's why in the parenthesis they say in the note this year when the sicha was published, Chayelu was on Shabbos Kisovis, gave it extra sicha published for that Shabbos, B'yim Chayelu, which is Yom Haledes Baal Shem Tov, the day of the birth of Baal Shem Tov, who was the Meyasid Toides Chassidus Hakloli. He founded the general teaching of Chassidus in the general Chassidus. Yom Haledes Rabbi Nazokin, also the birthday of the Alter Rebbe, Meyasid Toides Chassidus Chabad, who founded and established the teaching of Chassidus Chabad. Now, can say in these two opinions, which coincide and they fit the two types of thank you as mentioned earlier. It's hinted here the two types of hashpah influences, impact of the Baal Shem Tov and the Alter Rebbe over the Jewish people. Iker ha'adgosha shel toiras ha'chasidus ha'keleles shel Baal Shem Tov hi. The main emphasis of the teaching of Chassidus, the general teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, is la'orer koyach ha'emunah etzel bnei Yisrael, to awaken, to arouse the power of belief that exists by Yidden. as related in the talks of our Rebbe's, our leaders, that they told us about the effort of the Baal Shem Tov, and his occupation to Nekes Israel with children, Jewish children, to educate them by saying Ome Yishmerab and similar. And also his occupation with simple people, Lavim, the Amirus, he used to bring them, go around and ask them how they're doing, to bring them to saying Baruch Hashem, thank Hashem, Shekol Zehu Ma'ir Megala Be'Meskoyach Hamuna. All this was done that aroused and revealed by them the power of belief. Al derech haido haklol is the Meidani, similar to the general acknowledgement, as we say, which is the beginning of the day. But Dugmosa, and the similar to this haido, Bikkurim, as soon as you come to the land. Bad Gosha shel Admor Azoken. Yeah, come in. Bad Gosha shel Admor Azoken b'Toras Chassidus Chabadi. What is the emphasis of the Alter Rebbe? The teaching of Chabad is Shekol echad echad miYisrael chayiv lahaskil lahavim das. That every single person of the Jewish people is obligated to understand and to figure out and to know Chochma bin Adas bin Yonik Gidal Gadlus Hashem, in matters of greatness of Hashem, Kechol Yicholti, to the extent of his ability. As explained in the teaching of Chabad Chassidus at length, in a way, in a way that each and every one can understand according to their level, according to their abilities to not to just have a munah, say thank you out of simple munah like the Baal Shem Tov, but to actually get appreciation. And that fits with that thank you that comes after inheriting and settling. Lashon hisyashus, that comes settling, means it's a settled way. Through a person reflecting in his intellect, and the greatness of Hashem, is a poil that impacts that belief becomes settled in the person, and it settles by him. It becomes permanent. It's ad l'shleimus in the Yerushalayim Yeshiva, till the ultimate, complete Yerushalayim Yeshiva. Kibush v'chivul kol haaretz, conquering and distributing the whole land by the person. What it means to conquer the whole land, that by the person itself, that the munah penetrates all of the powers of his soul. Then it's in the ultimate wholesomeness when you thank Hashem in such a level of after all this reflection that you learn. Ach tzadikim yoy lishmecha yeshvu, on level yeshvu, settle yisharmas penecha oifn shel isyashvus v'kviyus, in a way of settling and kviyus. So the Rebbe took these two ideas, the idea of the emunah pshuta, the first idea, the meiday, the sifri miyat, as a thank you on the level, but the Alter Rebbe brought it also to the Zbodinus. It's like the Ach Tzadikim V'Yed L'Shmecha. And then you have that Zbodinus work and takes that Emunah Pshuta and it settles it in a way of Yeshu Yishorim, becomes permanent. And this is Mesichas Shabbos Parshas Tovei Chayelu, Tavshin Men Gimel and Tavshin Daled Men.